And at the end, Pelé says, Diego. And Maradona, he says, yeah, Pelé. And Pelé says, do you know Messi personally? And Maradona says, yes, but... And Pelé says, hang on, is he a good person? And Maradona says, yes, he's a good guy, but he has no personality. He doesn't have the personality to be a leader.
They called him the king of football, admired across the globe. But behind the medals and the smiling interviews, Pelé carried grudges that rarely made the headlines. From bitter rivalries with fellow legends to public clashes that stunned fans, there were a handful of players he simply couldn't stand. So who were the 5 names that pushed Pelé's patience to the limit? Most football fans think of Pelé's rivalries happening on the pitch, but one of his most bitter battles was actually with a man in a suit, Ricardo Teixeira, the longtime president of the Brazilian Football Confederation. On the surface, they seemed like allies. Both were powerful figures shaping Brazil's global image. But beneath that, Pelé saw something he despised: corruption and greed eating away at the heart of the sport he loved. The tension boiled over in the 1,990 seconds when Pelé publicly accused Teixeira of shady deals tied to sponsorship money. For someone of Pelé's stature, this was explosive. He wasn't just criticizing a man, he was pulling back the curtain on how football in Brazil was really being run. Teixeira didn't take it quietly. Instead, he used his influence to strike back, banning Pelé from any role in the 1994 World Cup draw. Imagine that, Brazil's most iconic player, the man who put the country on the football map, being blocked from its own showcase because of a personal feud. For years, their battle turned ugly. Pelé doubled down, calling out the corruption he believed was rotting the CBF from the inside. Teixeira, in turn, made sure Pelé was sidelined from major football events. To fans, it was a shocking display of just how much politics and power struggles could poison the game. And while this wasn't a rivalry in the traditional sense, there were no goals, no tackles, no whistles. It revealed another side of Pelé, a man who wasn't afraid to put names to the enemies he made, even when those names had the power to silence him. But that clash with Teixeira was just the beginning. Because when Pelé turned his attention back to the pitch, the feuds became even more personal, especially with one legendary Argentine who refused to live in his shadow. If there was one name that could make Pelé's blood boil, it was Diego Maradona. The two men were the undisputed icons of their eras, both carrying the weight of their nations and both obsessed with being remembered as the greatest of all time. But while Pelé kept a polished, diplomatic image, Maradona thrived on chaos, fueled by controversy, ego, and a wild lifestyle that made headlines just as often as his football did. From the very beginning, their rivalry was unavoidable. Fans constantly debated, was Pelé the king, or was Maradona the true genius? Pelé didn't take kindly to the comparisons. He once dismissed Maradona as not a role model, pointing at his substance issues and fiery temper. Maradona fired right back, calling Pelé a puppet of the football establishment and mocking him for staying quiet during Brazil's dictatorship. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a war of words that spanned decades. Their feud produced some of the most memorable jabs in football history. Maradona once sneered that Pelé should go back to the museum, implying his time had passed. Pelé, never one to let an insult slide, accused Maradona of being a bad influence and lacking the discipline needed to be a true legend. The media loved it, two giants, trading blows long after their playing days were over. But beneath the insults was something deeper. Neither man could stand the thought of being second best. Pelé's pride in his 3 World Cups clashed with Maradona's pride in carrying Argentina to glory almost single-handedly in 1986. To this day, fans argue about who was better, and the rivalry never truly died, because even after Maradona passed, Pelé couldn't resist one last bittersweet comment, saying Diego would finally be playing football in heaven. The king and the rebel. Their feud wasn't just personal, it became the fuel for one of the greatest debates in football history. And while Maradona was the loudest rival Pelé ever faced, the king's criticism wasn't reserved only for Argentina's bad boy. Years later, he turned his sharp tongue toward a quieter star who seemed far less controversial but perhaps even more threatening to his legacy. On the surface, Pelé and Lionel Messi seemed worlds apart. Messi was the quiet genius, the player who let his feet do the talking, while Pelé had built a reputation as the smiling ambassador of football. But when comparisons between Messi and Pelé began to heat up, the king's responses revealed a sharper edge. At first, Pelé offered polite praise, He admitted Messi was an extraordinary talent, a player with vision and balance that few could match, but every compliment seemed to come with a sting. In one interview, Pelé said Messi only uses one leg, suggesting the Argentine lacked the versatility that Pelé himself had mastered. Another time, he pointed out that Messi had never scored with his head the way Pelé had subtle, but very deliberate digs meant to remind the world of his own superiority. And when Messi's record-breaking goal tally with Barcelona began to dominate headlines, Pelé wasn't impressed. He implied that Messi's achievements were easier because of the modern era: better pitches, lighter balls, more protection from referees. To Pelé, those records didn't carry the same weight as the battles he fought in the brutal football of the 1960s and 1970s. It was clear Pelé felt the pressure of a new generation threatening his throne. To many fans, Messi was the natural heir to football's crown. But Pelé wasn't about to hand it over so easily. He knew the comparisons were inevitable, yet he made sure to remind everyone that Messi hadn't won a World Cup, a prize Pelé lifted 3 times. It was his ultimate trump card, the argument he used whenever the debate grew too close for comfort. The irony, of course, is that Messi himself rarely engaged. He never fired back, never insulted Pelé. But the King's defensive remarks showed how seriously he took the rivalry, even when it was mostly in his own mind. And if Messi's quiet dominance unsettled him, what came next cut even closer to home: a Brazilian star who Pelé both supported and criticized, sometimes in the very same sentence. When Neymar exploded onto the scene, many expected Pelé to embrace him as Brazil's next golden child, and in a way, he did. Pelé often praised Neymar's flair, his creativity, and his ability to electrify fans with moments of magic. He even compared Neymar's rise to his own, saying the young forward had the chance to carry Brazil back to glory. But that admiration came with sharp edges, and Pelé never hesitated to expose them. In interviews, Pelé repeatedly pointed out Neymar's weaknesses. He said Neymar was too one-dimensional, relying too heavily on dribbling and flair without the complete skill set needed to be considered among the all-time greats. He criticized Neymar's lack of defensive work, his tendency to go to ground too easily, and even his struggles in the air. To Pelé, Neymar wasn't just a rising star, he was also a project in need of fixing. The most controversial remarks came when Pelé claimed Neymar wasn't yet ready to be the best player in the world. This stung because at the time, Brazilian fans were desperate for a new hero after years of decline. Instead of shielding Neymar, Pelé publicly dissected his game. Some fans saw it as tough love, others saw it as jealousy. After all, Neymar had quickly become the face of modern Brazilian football, and some believed Pelé wasn't comfortable sharing that spotlight. Still, Pelé never abandoned Neymar completely. He defended him against harsh international criticism and called him Brazil's best hope in multiple tournaments. But his backhanded compliments told a different story. It was as if Pelé wanted Neymar to succeed, but only if success didn't threaten his own throne. And every time Neymar stumbled on the world stage, especially after Brazil's humiliating 7-1 loss to Germany in 2014, Pelé's words felt heavier, almost like a reminder of the impossible standard he had set. So while Pelé may have seen Neymar as a younger brother, his constant critiques revealed a complicated truth: respect mixed with rivalry, admiration shadowed by doubt. But Neymar wasn't the only one to face Pelé's biting tongue. Some didn't even need to be superstars. Anyone who dared to question Pelé's greatness quickly found themselves in his line of fire. For all the legends Pelé feuded with, some of his sharpest hate was reserved for those who questioned his legacy outright. Over the years, several players and pundits dismissed his achievements, calling his goal records inflated or suggesting that modern football had surpassed him. To Pelé, these weren't harmless comments, they were direct threats to his crown. One of his favorite targets was anyone who brought up the official goals debate. Pelé proudly claimed he scored over 1,200 goals, a number critics argued included friendlies and unofficial matches. When journalists or players mocked those numbers, Pelé fired back, insisting every goal mattered. He even went so far as to call some critics jealous or ignorant, a rare glimpse of anger from someone usually known for his charm. Then there were the players who dared to call him overrated. Some South American rivals in the 1970s and 1980s, including outspoken Argentinians, claimed Pelé had never played in Europe and therefore didn't deserve the global GOAT status. Pelé didn't hold back, dismissing them as nobodies compared to his achievements. His message was clear: challenge the king and expect to be cut down. Even modern stars weren't immune. Whenever new names entered the greatest of all time debate, Cristiano Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Zidane, Pelé always had a way of inserting himself into the conversation. Sometimes with sly praise, other times with pointed comparisons meant to keep him on top. It wasn't personal hatred toward each player, it was a pattern. Anyone who threatened to eclipse him became a rival by default. These feuds might not have been as loud as his battles with Maradona or as cutting as his critiques of Neymar, but they revealed something important. Pelé's legacy wasn't just built on his brilliance, it was defended with words, with pride, and sometimes with outright hostility. He hated the idea of being forgotten, of being second best, and he fought against it until the very end. But what do all these grudges, rivalries, and criticisms really say about the man behind the legend? For all the names Pelé clashed with, Teixeira, Maradona, Messi, Neymar, and the countless critics who poked at his throne, his hate was never just about the individual. It was about what they represented. Teixeira stood for the corruption Pelé wanted exposed. Maradona symbolized the rival who refused to bow. Messi was the quiet genius threatening to rewrite record books. Neymar carried the impossible burden of being the next king of Brazil. And the critics? They were living proof that time eventually comes for every legend. Pelé fought them all in his own way, sometimes with charm, sometimes with sharp words, and sometimes with silence that spoke louder than any insult. And maybe that's what made him human. For all his trophies, for all his goals, Pelé still wrestled with pride, ego, and the fear of being overshadowed. In the end, his grudges tell us just as much about him as his triumphs. They show us a man who wasn't just the king of football, but also a fighter for his legacy, sometimes gracefully, sometimes brutally. And maybe that's why the debates around him will never die. Because if Pelé could hate, even as the king, then maybe greatness isn't about being untouchable. Maybe it's about being remembered, flaws and all. So here's the real question. After hearing the names Pelé couldn't stand, which rivalry do you think defined him the most?